From janitor to millionaire's bride, she saved his mother's life without him knowing. Snow lashes against the glass walls of a 38th floor office in downtown Chicago. Isabella Rodriguez stands in the doorway, her yellow cleaning cart beside her, a navy blue uniform marking her place in the building's hierarchy. She shouldn't be here, not in this moment, but her eyes are fixed on the man slumped over a mahogany desk. Alexander Patterson III, CEO of Patterson Industries, a billionaire with power stretching across the city, looks nothing like the untouchable figure she has passed countless times in the lobby. His head rests in his hands, his suit rumpled, his face heavy with fear. The speakerphone between them carries the urgent voice of a doctor from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. His mother is in critical condition after a massive stroke. Isabella's breath catches as her nursing training pieces together the symptoms being described. Something important is missing from the diagnosis, something that could save or end Catherine Patterson's life within hours. Her hand grips the doorframe, torn between silence and action. What happens when a janitor realizes she may be the only one who can save a billionaire's mother, without either of them knowing their lives are about to change forever? Where are you watching from tonight? Hit subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's powerful story. Let us begin. Isabella Rodriguez grew up in Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood, a community alive with murals, music drifting from open windows, and the scent of fresh tortillas from family-owned bakeries. Her parents had come from Mexico with little more than determination, working long hours to provide for their children. For Isabella, life was never effortless, but it was filled with warmth, resilience, and the belief that education could open doors. By the time she reached high school, Isabella's focus was sharp. While other teenagers lost themselves in parties and distractions, she balanced homework with babysitting jobs, cashier shifts, and tutoring younger students. Every paycheck was split carefully, part to help her parents with rent, part set aside for the dream she clung to with unshakable determination, a nursing degree at the University of Illinois Chicago. Her years at UIC were relentless. Days blurred into nights of studying anatomy and pharmacology, followed by double shifts at coffee shops or hospital gift stores. While classmates took spring breaks or weekends off, Isabella was scrubbing tables, saving tip money to afford textbooks. Still, she pressed forward, graduating with honors and completing her clinical rotations with quiet pride. But reality hit harder than any exam. Student loans loomed. Her parents' health was changing. Her father's back pain growing worse after decades of labor, her mother's arthritis making even simple chores difficult. Isabella wanted to pursue her career fully, but family responsibilities weighed heavier than ambition. She accepted night work as a janitor at Patterson Industries headquarters, shelving her nursing license temporarily. Every evening, she pushed her yellow cleaning cart through polished hallways filled with marble floors and glass walls that seemed to touch the clouds. The contrast between her world and the one she cleaned was undeniable. Executives in tailored suits left behind half-empty coffee cups and crumpled notes, unaware of the young woman quietly sanitizing their spaces, carrying both exhaustion and dignity with her. Still, Isabella found small comforts. The city skyline outside the 38th floor glowed like a sea of stars, a reminder that she hadn't given up on her dream entirely. She whispered promises to herself. One day, she would wear scrubs again, not just a uniform with rubber gloves. Across the city, another life unfolded with a different kind of weight. Alexander Patterson III was born into legacy. His grandfather had built Patterson Industries from a modest construction company into a sprawling empire of real estate, technology, and finance. His father expanded it further, pushing into international markets. By the time Alexander inherited control, the company was valued in the billions, with skyscrapers across Chicago bearing the Patterson name. From the outside, his life gleamed with perfection. He lived in a glass-walled penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, attended exclusive galas, and commanded boardrooms with confidence. Newspapers called him one of the most eligible bachelors in America, his face often photographed beside celebrities and politicians. Yet privilege came with invisible chains. Every decision he made carried the weight of generations. Shareholders demanded growth. Business rivals waited for any misstep. Behind every victory, Alexander felt the unspoken question. Was he honoring his family's legacy or simply maintaining it? He worked relentlessly, often through nights, chasing deals that promised to cement his name further in the city's story. But success left him isolated. Friends drifted, romances fizzled under the scrutiny of headlines. In quiet moments, standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, he often wondered whether anyone truly saw him, or if they only saw Patterson Industries. Though their lives ran on separate tracks, Isabella and Alexander crossed paths more often than either realized. She cleaned the conference room minutes after he concluded late-night meetings. She emptied trash bins outside his office, her footsteps muffled while he scribbled notes on financial reports. Neither spoke, but occasionally, their eyes met in brief acknowledgments, an executive too preoccupied to linger, and a janitor too cautious to overstep. What neither knew was how quickly their carefully built walls would crack. Isabella, sacrificing her dreams to hold her family together. Alexander, carrying the crushing expectations of an empire. Two lives shaped by duty, unknowingly circling each other in the same building, night after night, as though fate was quietly waiting for the right moment to bring them face to face. In that contrast, the daughter of immigrants with calloused hands and a nursing license on hold, and the heir to a dynasty living in glass towers, lay the beginning of a story neither could have anticipated. Isabella's nights always began the same way. She arrived just as the day's tide of executives spilled out of the building, their conversations clipped and hurried, their car keys jingling as they headed toward the executive garage where sleek black sedans waited. She parked her aging Honda in the farthest corner of the staff lot, a space tucked away near the delivery entrance. Pulling her navy blue jacket close against the Chicago wind, she walked through the service corridor, where the walls were plain and the lighting functional, an entirely different world from the marble lobby above. She swiped her ID card, retrieved her cart, and began her shift. The routine was methodical, but not mindless. Empty trash bins, wipe down polished tables, sanitize restrooms, replace paper towels. Each task was part of a rhythm she had mastered over months, almost like a quiet dance through spaces meant for people who rarely noticed her presence. By the time Isabella reached the higher floors, silence blanketed the corridors. Occasionally, she passed late-departing associates, their faces pale under office lighting, still glued to laptops. Most ignored her, eyes fixed on screens or phones. She didn't mind. In the stillness, she found a kind of peace. Yet one office always remained alive long after others darkened. Alexander Patterson's corner office glowed like a beacon from the end of the 38th floor. Some nights, Isabella would see his silhouette framed against the window, shoulders tense as he studied financial reports. Other nights, he paced while speaking into his headset, his voice low, threaded with determination. He rarely looked up when she passed by with her cart, though once or twice their eyes met in fleeting acknowledgement. To Isabella, he was simply another part of the building's rhythm. The man who worked when others left, whose office she tidied carefully but quietly, never disturbing the neatly stacked documents on his desk or the glass of water often left half-finished. For Alexander, those nights blurred into endless cycles of decision-making. The building was his domain, yet even at the height of power, he often felt caged by it. The headquarters itself seemed designed to remind him of responsibility. The ground floors boasted soaring ceilings, marble polished to perfection, and lobbies filled with art chosen to reflect modern ambition. Clients and investors saw only success when they entered those doors. But Alexander also knew the other side of the building. The service stairwells, the underground loading docks, the windowless break rooms for custodial staff. Spaces hidden from public view, yet essential to keeping the tower running. The hierarchy was carved into every inch. Executives arriving through a private garage with valet services, while workers like Isabella walked long, drafty hallways to reach their assignments. It was an architecture of separation, subtle but undeniable. Alexander noticed it, though he rarely voiced his thoughts. To question it would be to question the system his family had built. Still, in moments of solitude, he wondered about the unseen lives around him. The people who passed through at night, leaving the building spotless before the city awoke again. Unknowingly, Isabella and Alexander shared the same hours, breathing the same recycled air, moving within the same walls. She polished the glass conference tables where he negotiated contracts worth millions. She straightened chairs around the boardroom he would return to before sunrise. Their worlds brushed against each other constantly, without either of them truly stepping across the invisible line. Some nights, Isabella lingered at the window after cleaning, letting herself look out over the city lights before pushing her cart away. She never stayed long, just a stolen moment, as though reminding herself that she was part of the same skyline Alexander commanded from his penthouse. And though neither would have admitted it, something subtle connected them already. For Isabella, it was a quiet awareness of his presence, his late nights making her own feel less lonely. For Alexander, it was the unspoken comfort of knowing someone else moved through the silence of his building, a reminder that even in solitude, he wasn't entirely alone. The building itself became their silent witness. Its walls carried the weight of both ambition and sacrifice, its elevators transporting lives separated by wealth yet bound by routine. In its glass reflections, Isabella's navy uniform and Alexander's tailored suits shared the same corridors, though from entirely different worlds. Months passed this way, their lives circling each other without colliding. Neither could have guessed how quickly that would change, or how much the quiet space between them was already shaping something far greater than routine. Chicago's winter had a way of silencing the city, muffling its energy beneath layers of snow. That February evening, the storm swept across downtown with relentless force. The wind from Lake Michigan howled against the Patterson Industries tower, rattling even its reinforced glass. Streets below emptied quickly. Cabs fought through drifts while most commuters escaped home long before dark. For Isabella, the storm meant fewer interruptions. By the time she parked her old Honda in the staff lot, the wind had numbed her cheeks and turned her breath into clouds. The building was unusually quiet, the kind of stillness that pressed against her ears as she began her shift. Elevators hummed softly, carrying her cart to the higher floors where silence deepened with every level. The executive floor, normally faintly buzzing with associates working late, was deserted. Only one light glowed at the far end, the corner office. Isabella paused, recognizing it immediately. Alexander Patterson was still inside. She hesitated, gripping the cart handle. Usually she worked around his office carefully, timing her routine so she wouldn't disturb him. Tonight, the hallway felt different, as if the storm had sealed the two of them into the same isolated world. As she approached, she noticed the door slightly ajar. A low voice drifted out, not Alexander's but coming from the speakerphone on his desk. Isabella stopped, listening instinctively. "Mr. Patterson, the clot has caused extensive damage. We've stabilized her, but her chances worsen by the hour unless we move to surgery." The doctor's words carried clinical urgency, each phrase clipped by static. Inside, Alexander sat hunched forward, his $1,000 suit wrinkled, his tie loosened as though he had been pulling at it for air. His hands pressed against his forehead, his body trembling in a way Isabella had never witnessed in the months she had worked those halls. He looked nothing like the untouchable executive she had seen from a distance. The doctor's explanation continued, listing symptoms and treatment options. Isabella's chest tightened. She had studied these very cases during her nursing training. Something in the report didn't align. The tone, the chosen procedure, it was as though they were focusing on the wrong pathway. Her pulse quickened. Her instincts screamed. Catherine Patterson, the matriarch of the empire, was fighting for her life, and the medical team was overlooking a critical sign. Isabella gripped the doorframe, her knuckles whitening. She knew she shouldn't listen, knew this was not her place. She was a janitor, invisible in this world. Yet her training wouldn't let her walk away. She caught herself whispering the word under her breath, the diagnosis they were missing. Her voice was so soft it almost disappeared into the hum of the storm battering the windows. Alexander suddenly raised his head. His eyes were red, his jaw clenched tight as though holding back words he couldn't say. For the first time, he looked less like a man of steel and more like a son, helpless, frightened, searching for answers that refused to come. From the doorway, Isabella felt a sharp ache in her chest. For months, he had been a distant figure framed in power and wealth untouchable. Tonight, that distance dissolved. She was seeing him stripped of armor, and it stirred something unexpected inside her, a tenderness mixed with urgency. Her heart raced. Should she step forward? Should she interrupt? Every rule told her no, but every instinct told her yes. The choice tightened around her like the storm outside pressing against the glass. The doctor's voice broke through again. We'll proceed as discussed, unless there's objection. Time is limited. Isabella's breath caught. They were missing it. They were missing the single detail that could mean the difference between life and death. She couldn't stay silent, not now. Her hand trembled as she pressed lightly against the office door, pushing it open just enough for the hinges to groan. Alexander's head snapped toward her. His expression carried both shock and confusion, as though he wasn't sure if the storm had conjured her there. The world seemed to pause in that instant, the storm raging outside, the sterile voice on the speaker, Isabella standing frozen between duty and fear. She hadn't spoken yet, but in her silence hung the weight of a truth only she could see. Isabella's fingers hovered near the door, her pulse hammering as if the storm outside had moved into her chest. Every instinct reminded her of her place. She was the night worker, expected to glide unseen through the marble corridors, expected to polish the traces of other people's success without leaving a mark of her own. Crossing that threshold would mean exposing herself, breaking every rule she had lived by to keep this job. Yet the voice on the speakerphone continued, each clinical word driving deeper into her conscience. She had trained for moments like this. She had spent years in crowded lecture halls, hunched over borrowed textbooks, rehearsing symptoms and case studies until exhaustion blurred her vision. She knew what she was hearing was wrong, or at the very least incomplete. And if no one corrected it, Catherine Patterson's hours might be numbered. Her hands shook, torn between fear of losing everything and the weight of a human life. Her parents depended on her wages. Student loans towered over her like debts written in stone. One wrong step could mean dismissal, disgrace, another dream deferred. But what was the purpose of all her sacrifice if she couldn't speak up when it mattered most? She exhaled slowly, pressed her knuckles to the doorframe, and knocked. The sound cut through the room like a fracture in glass. Alexander lifted his head sharply, his storm-gray eyes narrowing in disbelief. For a moment he didn't move, just stared at the silhouette in his doorway, caught between confusion and irritation. Yes. His voice was hoarse, roughened not by command but by exhaustion. Isabella stepped forward, nerves lighting fire under her skin. I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Patterson. Her voice wavered before finding steadiness. But I couldn't help overhearing the consultation. She paused, the words catching in her throat. How could she, a janitor, step into this conversation? Alexander blinked, frowning. You overheard? She nodded, gripping her cleaning rag like a lifeline. I know I shouldn't have. I know this isn't my place. But I have medical training. I studied nursing at UIC. I've worked with patients who had similar strokes. Some of the symptoms you described, they suggest something that might have been overlooked. The room froze around them. The speaker crackled with the faint voice of the physician, asking if Alexander was still present. But Alexander had muted the line without looking away from Isabella. His stare was sharp but not unkind, searching her face for truth. You're the janitor, he said quietly, more statement than question. I am, she whispered, swallowing her pride. But before this, I was a nursing student. I still hope to finish. I've worked with neurology cases. Please, I wouldn't risk speaking up if I wasn't sure. His brow furrowed, the faintest line of uncertainty cutting through his grief. For the first time that night, he looked at her not as a worker, but as someone standing between despair and hope. What exactly are you suggesting? His tone was clipped, but beneath it was desperation. Isabella's words steadied as her confidence took hold. Based on what the doctor said, there's a chance your mother's symptoms aren't just the clot they're treating. Her speech slurring, the sudden weakness, it could indicate a secondary blockage that's being missed. If that isn't addressed immediately, the surgery they're planning won't save her. It could make things worse. The silence stretched, broken only by the wind pounding against the glass walls of the office. Alexander leaned back in his chair, staring at her as if trying to measure the impossible. Could the woman who polished his floors truly be the one to see what a team of specialists had missed? You realize, he said finally, his voice low. If you're wrong, you could cost me more than you know. I know. Her throat tightened, but her gaze didn't waver. I could lose this job tonight. I could lose everything. But if I stay quiet, your mother could lose her life. I can't carry that. For a long beat, neither moved. It was as though the storm itself held its breath, waiting. Something softened in Alexander's eyes. For the first time since his world had shattered hours ago, a flicker of hope broke through. He turned, unmuted the phone, and his voice rang clearer than it had all night. Doctor, before you proceed, I want you to reconsider your assessment. There's another possibility. I want every test run before you make a call on surgery. The physician hesitated on the line. Sir, with respect, who advised? Alexander cut him off. Just do it. He pressed mute again, his chest rising and falling as though he'd just taken his first breath in hours. Slowly, he looked back at Isabella, studying her with new eyes. Gratitude, disbelief, and something else lingered in his expression. Something unspoken yet undeniable. You risked everything, he said softly. She felt her knees weaken, though she stood tall. It wasn't a risk. It was the right thing. In that office, surrounded by silence and snow, something shifted between them. She was no longer invisible. He was no longer untouchable. Two lives, separated by walls of wealth and duty, had collided on the edge of truth. The storm still raged outside the glass walls, yet inside Alexander's office a different storm brewed. This one measured in heartbeats and decisions. Isabella stood steady, her nerves taut but her voice unwavering as she outlined the symptoms she recognized. Chest pain disguised as a stroke, fainting spells that pointed to cardiac strain, and the subtle details the consulting physician had overlooked. Her words came carefully, but with a conviction that filled the sterile office with urgency. It could be Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, she said quietly, though each syllable carried weight. It's often called stress-induced heart failure. It mimics a stroke in its early stages, but the treatment is very different. If they rush her into surgery without confirming, the risk could be fatal. Alexander leaned forward, his hand gripping the edge of the desk. You're saying the doctors missed this? I'm saying it's possible, Isabella replied, forcing calm. The only way to know is through cardiac imaging. Northwestern Memorial has the facilities. If they test her right away, they can adjust treatment before it's too late. He didn't hesitate. Alexander seized the phone, his voice sharp with command, cutting through the professional resistance on the other end. Transfer my mother to Northwestern immediately. I want a full cardiac workup, echocardiogram, angiogram, everything. No delays. The authority in his tone brooked no argument. Within minutes, arrangements were in motion. Isabella remained at the edge of the room, her hands clasped tightly, torn between relief and terror. She had taken the risk. Now all she could do was hope she hadn't been wrong. Hours blurred into motion. An ambulance pulled Catherine Patterson through the night toward Northwestern, escorted by Alexander and a small team of specialists roused from their beds. Isabella was not part of that convoy. She remained in the tower, quietly folding her supplies into her janitorial cart, unsure if she would even have a job come morning. But her mind remained tethered to the woman fighting for her life, and to the man whose faith in her had been the difference between silence and action. At the hospital, the truth emerged. Catherine's angiogram revealed what Isabella had feared: a transient weakening of the left ventricle, the hallmark of Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. Stress had gripped the heart so violently it mimicked a blockage, but there was no clot to remove, no artery to bypass. Surgery would have been catastrophic. Instead, medication and careful monitoring would give Catherine's heart the chance to recover. Alexander stood beside his mother's bed, staring at the monitors as if they were lifelines written in light. He had spent his life making billion-dollar decisions, but none had carried the weight of this night. And it was not his own knowledge or power that had saved her. It was the courage of the woman no one in his world even saw. When the attending physician confirmed it, Alexander nearly sagged with relief. "Whoever caught this," the doctor said, "saved her life. She has a strong chance of full recovery now." Alexander didn't need to ask who. 2 days later, Isabella walked her usual route through Patterson Industries, expecting a reprimand or perhaps a termination letter waiting with her supervisor. Instead, she found Alexander waiting near the executive elevator, his tailored suit a sharp contrast to her plain uniform. His expression carried exhaustion, but also something gentler, something that softened the steel of his features. "Ms. Marquez," he greeted, his voice quiet yet deliberate. He rarely addressed staff by name, but with her it seemed natural. Isabella froze, gripping her cleaning supplies. "Mr. Patterson, I didn't expect. I owe you more than I can ever repay." His gaze held hers, unwavering. "They confirmed everything you said. Without your intervention, my mother would have been rushed into surgery. She wouldn't have survived." Her throat tightened. She glanced down at her shoes, unable to carry the weight of his gratitude. "I only spoke up because I had to. Anyone in my position would have." "No," Alexander countered, his tone firm but warm. "Most would have stayed silent. You risked your job, your reputation, everything, because you knew it was right." She felt heat rush to her cheeks, but her humility held. "I'm glad she's safe. That's all that matters." His expression softened further, and for a fleeting moment the walls of wealth and hierarchy seemed to dissolve between them. "My family wants to thank you properly," he continued. "My sister has already been by my mother's side, and she asked about the woman who saved her life. My mother, once she's stronger, will want to see you too." The thought unsettled Isabella. She wasn't ready to stand in the glow of attention. She shook her head lightly. "I don't need recognition, Mr. Patterson. Please, let your mother focus on healing. That's enough." Alexander studied her for a moment, as though struck by the contrast between her humility and the world he inhabited, where credit was currency and recognition a daily pursuit. "You may not want it," he said, his voice lowering, "but you deserve it." Something flickered between them then, an unspoken acknowledgement that what bound them was no longer accident or circumstance, but trust. She had stepped into his life when everything was breaking, and he would not forget it. That night, as Isabella walked to the parking garage where her aging Honda waited beneath layers of snow, she felt an unfamiliar mix of exhaustion and lightness. She had spoken the truth at the risk of everything she depended on, and for once, the world had listened. High above, in the penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, Alexander stood at the window, his thoughts straying from corporate forecasts and family legacies to the quiet woman whose courage had altered the course of his life. He had known power in many forms, but never had he felt indebted in so personal a way. For both of them, the city lights looked different that night, less like barriers, more like possibilities. The first conversations between them were hesitant, born not of design but of circumstance. Alexander's late-night work sessions continued, though now he found himself pausing when Isabella entered his office to clean. At first, it was simple courtesy, an acknowledgement he might not have extended before. But soon, curiosity slipped in, reshaping the silence between them into something far less ordinary. "Where did you learn all of that?" he asked one evening, his eyes lifting from a spread of contracts to follow her movements. "The medical knowledge. It wasn't in a manual for this job, I assume." She hesitated, wiping down the corner of his desk, weighing how much to reveal. I was studying nursing, University of Illinois. I had to step back when my father got sick. Bills piled up faster than I could keep track of, and the student loans didn't stop. So I work nights. It keeps my family afloat. Her words were matter of fact, without bitterness, but Alexander heard the sacrifice buried within them. It was a life where every choice carried cost, where dreams bent under the weight of necessity. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with a new intensity. "You're still planning to finish?" A flicker of determination lit her eyes. "One day. Nursing isn't just a career for me. It's how I want to serve. Where I grew up, people wait until they're too sick to go to the hospital because they can't afford it. My community needs more people who understand that reality." Her voice softened, but conviction anchored every word. It wasn't ambition she spoke of, it was purpose. Alexander, who lived in a world of acquisitions and metrics, found himself listening as if the stakes of her story were greater than any deal he had ever closed. On another night, their conversation veered toward family. Isabella folded cloths into her cart while Alexander closed his laptop, unusually willing to linger. "My parents came from Jalisco," she told him. "They worked harder than anyone I know, my mom in a bakery, my dad in construction. Every dollar they earned went toward making sure I had a chance at something bigger. I can't let their sacrifices go to waste." Alexander nodded slowly. "Family loyalty runs deep with you." "It has to," she replied. "It's the only safety net we've ever had." The words stayed with him longer than he admitted. In his world, loyalty was often transactional, tied to contracts and inheritances. But Isabella spoke of it as something unshakable, woven into the very fabric of her being. When she turned the question back on him, Alexander hesitated. Few ever asked him about his own burdens. Fewer still waited for an honest answer. "Legacy," he said finally, his tone edged with weariness. "That's what my family values. My grandfather built this company from nothing. My father expanded it into a global powerhouse. And me, I'm expected to carry it further." Isabella looked at him steadily. "That sounds heavy." "It is," he admitted. "Success doesn't leave much room for choice. Most people see privilege. They don't see the cost of always being the one who can't fail." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Not awkward, but filled with an unspoken recognition that both carried loads the other had never experienced, yet somehow understood. Over the following weeks, the pattern became familiar. Alexander worked into the night, his office glowing while the rest of the building slept. Isabella arrived with her cart, quiet but no longer invisible. Their exchanges grew deeper, each revealing fragments of themselves that few others were allowed to see. She spoke of neighbors in Pilsen who shared medicine because prescriptions cost too much, of children who came to free clinics only when fevers reached dangerous heights. Her frustration was clear, but so was her compassion. "Healthcare isn't a privilege," she told him one evening, her eyes burning with conviction. "It's survival. And yet, the system treats people like my parents as if they're asking for too much." Alexander, who had lived with access to the best physicians and private care, felt the sharp sting of her truth. He didn't argue, he listened. For perhaps the first time, he considered how the empire he inherited could look from the ground level. In turn, he let her see his world, the constant negotiations, the pressure of quarterly results, the relentless scrutiny of shareholders. "It's not sympathy I want," he clarified one night. "Just someone to know that the success others envy feels more like a cage than a crown." She didn't offer platitudes. She simply met his gaze and said, "Everyone has a weight. Yours is no less real because it's dressed in wealth." The simplicity of her words unsettled him. In her, he found no judgment, only recognition. And in that recognition, respect grew into something deeper, something neither of them named, though both felt it in the pauses between words, in the way their eyes lingered just a little longer than before. One night, as the city winds battered the windows, Alexander closed a folder and asked, "If you could change one thing about your life right now, what would it be?" Isabella didn't hesitate. "Time. More hours in the day so I could work, study, and still sit with my mom during dinner. Everything else, I can figure out if I just had that. He smiled faintly, though the answer pierced him. It wasn't riches or recognition she craved. It was something far more human, far more elusive. And you? She asked softly. He hesitated, then gave the most honest answer he'd spoken in years. Freedom. To choose without carrying the weight of 3 generations on my shoulders. Their eyes held across the expanse of his office, a gulf bridged not by wealth or circumstance, but by a shared understanding of sacrifice. In those late hours, while the city below moved on unaware, their 2 worlds, once so distant, began to intertwine. Alexander had faced boardrooms filled with executives, investors with sharp eyes, and competitors eager for his misstep. None of it had unnerved him as much as asking Isabella if she might join him for dinner. Her reaction was immediate, surprise followed by cautious retreat. "Mr. Patterson," she began, her voice steady yet laced with uncertainty, "I don't think that's a good idea." "It's Alexander," he corrected gently, lowering the formality between them. "And I promise, this isn't charity or curiosity. I'd simply like to spend time with you, outside of this building, away from everything else." Isabella shook her head, gathering her supplies. "We live in different worlds. If anyone saw us, they'd think I was taking advantage. Or worse, that you were." Her words struck with quiet force. He recognized the truth in them, but he also felt the certainty within himself. "Let me prove otherwise. One evening, on your terms, in your world. If you're uncomfortable, it ends there." It was his insistence, not forceful but earnest, that softened her resistance. A week later, she agreed. Their first outing wasn't to a 5-star restaurant or a glittering gala. It was a small, family-owned place in Pilsen, the kind of restaurant where every dish carried the flavors of heritage and love. Isabella chose it deliberately, testing not only his sincerity, but also his willingness to step into her space without condescension. When Alexander entered the restaurant, he stood out immediately, his tailored coat, his polished shoes, the subtle deference of the staff who recognized his name from headlines. Yet he carried himself with humility, offering warm smiles, shaking hands when Isabella introduced him to the owners as if he were any other guest. They sat across from each other at a modest wooden table, the hum of conversation surrounding them, the aroma of roasted peppers and fresh tortillas weaving through the air. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Isabella asked, studying him closely. "You could be dining with clients at the top of the Hancock Tower, and here you are with me." He met her gaze steadily. "I don't care where I am, as long as it's with you." Her cheeks warmed at his sincerity. For once, she allowed herself to relax, sharing stories of her childhood in Pilsen, birthday parties where neighbors pooled resources, block festivals filled with music, evenings when her father came home from work with hands blistered but eyes shining with pride. Alexander listened as if every detail were a gift, as though her memories mattered more than any report on his desk. By the end of the night, Isabella caught herself laughing freely, her guard easing in ways she hadn't thought possible. Still, doubts lingered. Walking home, she voiced them with honesty. "If people see us together, they'll say I'm only interested in your money. That's what happens when someone like me stands beside someone like you." He stopped on the quiet street, the glow of a lamppost framing his features. "Isabella, do you think I measure worth in bank accounts? You've shown me courage, wisdom, and kindness when you had nothing to gain. That is what matters to me." Her breath caught at the conviction in his tone, though fear still tugged at her heart. Trust, she knew, wasn't built in a night. The most unexpected voice of encouragement came from Catherine Patterson. Weeks after her recovery, she invited Isabella to the hospital garden, where winter's chill hadn't yet driven away the stubborn evergreens. "You saved my life," Catherine said softly, her hand warm against Isabella's. "But you've given my son something more valuable than health, hope. I haven't seen him this alive in years." Isabella's instinct was to deflect. "Mrs. Patterson, your son and I." "Catherine," she interrupted firmly, a twinkle of amusement in her eyes. "And don't think for a moment I don't see what's happening. My son has everything money can buy, but what he's found in you can't be purchased. Don't let fear rob you of that." The words, spoken without judgment, lingered in Isabella's heart long after their meeting ended. The months that followed were filled with moments that stitched their lives together. Alexander learning to savor tamales wrapped in corn husks rather than silver cloches, Isabella accompanying him to charity events where her quiet grace drew more admiration than her gown. They were learning not only about each other, but also about how to exist together in spaces that once seemed impossible to bridge. When Alexander finally decided to propose, he did not choose a gala, nor a staged moment beneath glittering chandeliers. He chose the office where everything had begun, the same corner room where she first knocked on his door that stormy February night. It was late, the city lights flickering against the glass as Isabella entered to clean as she always did. Alexander was waiting, nerves coursing through him in a way no negotiation had ever produced. She looked puzzled when she saw him standing instead of working. "Is something wrong?" "On the contrary," he said softly, stepping toward her. In his hand was a small velvet box, but his voice carried the true weight. "This place was where you stepped in and changed my life. Where you saved my mother. Where you taught me to see beyond myself. I don't want to imagine the future without you in it." He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring, not ostentatious, but timeless, chosen with her humility in mind. Isabella's hand flew to her lips, tears welling in her eyes. "Alexander, I know our worlds are different," he said, his voice trembling despite himself. "But my heart knows no division. Will you marry me?" For a heartbeat, she stood frozen, emotions flooding her. Every fear, every doubt rose up, only to be swept aside by the undeniable truth of what she felt for him. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger, "yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and the gulf that once stretched between their lives seemed to dissolve into nothing. The office, once merely a place of work, became the setting of their most intimate promise, the beginning not just of love, but of a shared destiny. The morning of the wedding broke with a rare kind of clarity. The skies above Chicago carried a sharp blue, the air fresh and cool, as though the day itself had chosen to bless what was to come. The Chicago Botanic Garden had been selected not for extravagance, but for the way it seemed to gather the beauty of nature into one peaceful setting. For Isabella, it felt like a place where her family's warmth and Alexander's world of refinement could meet on equal ground. For Alexander, it was a reminder that life's most important moments are not framed by steel and glass, but by the simple wonder of living things. Guests began to arrive in steady streams, filling the garden paths with a mix of voices and colors that reflected the couple's journey. Executives and shareholders came dressed in dark suits, carrying the polish of the corporate sphere. They were joined by families from Pilsen, women with bright shawls, men in their best pressed shirts, children darting between them with restless excitement. Two communities that might never have crossed paths found themselves walking the same paths, drawn together by the celebration of a love that had defied the logic of social boundaries. The ceremony took place beneath a floral arch woven with roses and marigolds, carefully chosen to honor both sides of the family. Isabella's dress was simple but radiant, her confidence lending it a beauty that no designer label could have improved upon. She walked down the aisle on her father's arm, his pride visible in the way he held her close. Alexander, waiting at the end, felt his nerves dissolve the instant he caught sight of her. Every barrier, every difference, every doubt seemed to fall away in that moment. When their vows were spoken, they did not limit themselves to words of romance alone. They promised to share in responsibility as well as joy, to carry one another through hardship as well as triumph, to honor their separate histories while building something entirely new together. Catherine, seated in the front row, wept quietly, her heart filled not only with gratitude to Isabella for saving her life, but with a deep affection for the woman who had given her son a sense of wholeness. The reception that followed was unlike anything the garden had hosted before. A mariachi band alternated with a string quartet, their sounds weaving together into an unexpected harmony. Plates of mole, tamales, and arroz con pollo were served beside delicate French pastries and wines selected from Alexander's favorite vineyards. On the dance floor, executives accustomed to measured speeches found themselves clapping to rhythms they had never heard before, while neighbors from Pilsen embraced the chance to share their traditions with a crowd unaccustomed to such openness. Children from Isabella's community laughed and ran between tables, pulling even the most reserved guests into impromptu games, while Alexander's colleagues watched with curiosity that soon softened into admiration. What might have once been two incompatible worlds had become, at least for one night, a single family joined in laughter, music, and joy. The story of their union carried lessons that seemed to echo through the evening. Isabella's years of study, though interrupted by financial hardship, had never been wasted. That knowledge had prepared her for the night when Catherine's life hung in the balance. What had once seemed like an abandoned dream revealed itself as a foundation for extraordinary purpose. Her courage to knock on Alexander's door, to risk her position and speak truth when silence might have been safer, had shown that integrity mattered more than titles. Her nightly work with mop and broom, dismissed by many as invisible, had carried its own quiet dignity, and it was that very role that placed her at the threshold of fate. Alexander, in turn, had discovered truths he had long overlooked. Success, he came to understand, was not measured by balance sheets or acquisitions, but by the ability to listen, to value, and to recognize humanity even where others might fail to look. His union with Isabella demonstrated that bridges could indeed be built across divides that seemed fixed, between privilege and struggle, wealth and working class, silence and voice. Together, they embodied the possibility of an American dream reimagined, one that thrived not on exclusion but on recognizing worth wherever it was found. As night deepened and the final dance began, Alexander took Isabella's hand and led her to the center of the floor. Their movements were unpolished, imperfect even, but filled with sincerity that outshone elegance. Around them, families from both sides joined in, clapping, singing, moving together as if centuries of difference could melt away in the space of a song. It was not a polished waltz or a staged performance, but something far more enduring. Two lives joined with the support of everyone who had walked into the garden that day. The celebration carried with it a quiet but powerful message. Success does not rest in wealth or recognition alone. It lies in the willingness to connect with others, to speak truth even when it costs us, to honor the dignity in every form of work, and to believe that differences can be bridged by respect and love. Some of life's most profound changes do not come from power or position, but from recognizing the humanity in those who walk quietly among us. As the evening closed, guests left the garden not only with memories of a wedding, but with a sense that they had witnessed something rare, a story that reminded them of what is possible when courage, humility, and love come together. If this story moved you, we invite you to smash that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Tomorrow, another powerful story awaits, one that will remind you once again that every person you encounter has the power to change your life. Your likes, shares, and subscriptions help us keep bringing these stories to light. Stories that prove the most meaningful success comes not from status or wealth, but from the human connections we dare to see and honor.